needed to pull up a verse from, or a couple of verses from our Torah portion this Shabbat. Our Torah portion on this Shabbat is Tetze, and it's a whole long list of rather incredible mitzvot, of responsibilities, obligations we have as we move through the world. These aren't show up to services and pray 3 times a day. It's not that set of mitzvot or how to do this sacrifice or that sacrifice. It is all about between a human and his fellow. It's all about between one human and another. And in this case, it has to do with the world of animal husbandry. Do I have anybody here that's very involved in the world of animal husbandry? Yes. Do you have chickens? No.
I'm a paper farmer.
Paper farmer. Trying to track down the trees, you just got to keep track of that herd. It gets complicated. I was kidding. Okay. So, do anyone have chickens? Anyone have goats? Does anyone have a friend that has chickens or goats? Some of us do. Does anyone have an axolotl? Yes, I kind of figured that. So that's this Torah portion is quite extraordinary because it really gets into the idea of lost stuff, but in this case, it's animals. So in chapter 22, if you see your fellow's ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your fellow. If your fellow does not live near you, or you do not know who he is, you shall bring it home. It shall remain with you until your fellow claims it, and you shall give it back to him. You shall do the same with his donkey. You shall do the same with his garment. You shall so too shall you do with anything that your fellow loses and you find. You must not remain indifferent. It is really a pretty incredible instruction, and there's then a rabbinic midrash that takes it a little bit further. Have any of you heard the story of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa? River says he has. Okay, so River, you can check my details on this. So Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa lives in a house with his wife, and they're out in the yard, and they hear some clucking going on. And they're like, wait a second, that sounds like it's right outside our gate. And they open up their gate, and there is a bag, and inside are 2 chickens. So now they have 2 chickens. And he says, I wonder whose chickens these are. Picks up the bag, he picks up the chickens, he's looking at the chickens, he's looking to the left, he's looking to the right. He doesn't see anyone whose chickens these might be. And so he brings the chickens in, and he says, we've got chickens. And his wife says, great, we can feed our family, we can do this, we can do that, we've got chickens. And Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa says, wait, these aren't our chickens, I gotta get them back to the owner. But I don't know who the owner is. So he starts putting out the messages and words that, by the way, if you left your chickens at the corner of come back because I got your chickens. However, what do you know about chickens? They lay eggs. And 2 chickens become more chickens. And suddenly they are overrun with chickens. If you want a great Rabbi Michael story, ask me at the Oneg about the chickens in Jackson, Mississippi, when my father was interviewing for the congregation in Tampa. Very exciting. Can you imagine their house full of chickens? Well, you can't do anything more with the chickens. And so what do they have to do with the chickens? They didn't pluck them. They're not their chickens. So they sold them, and what did they sell? Because they then can't use the money. What did they do? They bought a goat. Goat wasn't theirs, so they couldn't keep the milk. They couldn't drink the milk, but what did they do? They made cheese, and they sold the cheese, and then it becomes more goats. You see where this is going. It just becomes an ever snowball, but in each stage of it, they say, we realize that we have this responsibility that we have to take care of these animals, realizing on another level that they are not actually ours. And the story ends very sweetly as a guy named Jacob is walking by, and he sees this goat, and he's like looking at the goat, and then a chicken runs out, and he says, you know, I had a few years ago, I was over in this part of town, and I put down some chickens, and I came back, and they were gone, and the Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa says, yeah, I know, and here's your goat. And then he has to explain how his chickens turned into a goat. Okay. In case you think I'm totally making this up, it's a real rabbinic story, number one. Number two, there's actually a real kind of version of this. How many of you have been to England? More of you have been to England that have owned a goat. It's probably a good bet in this congregation. So in England, there was a young lady named Laura Buxton. And Laura Buxton was a curious sort, and she had a helium balloon. And she wrote her name on a tag, and she says, my name is Laura Buxton, I'm this age, I'm from this is my address. If you find my balloon, can you reach out to me? And she takes the balloon, and she releases the balloon. The balloon goes up in the air. This, by the way, is a story on Radiolab. If you listen to it, you get the good sound effects that I'm not going to do tonight. The balloon goes up in the air, and against the prevailing winds, according to Radiolab, it goes 100 miles south, it comes down and it lands in a bush, okay? Man comes out and he finds a balloon in his bush, and he's like, this is trash. Why are the neighbor kids throwing trash balloon in my bush? And he picks it up and he looks at the name and he says, aha, see, it is the neighbor kids. And he goes over to the neighbor's family, he knocks on the door, and he looks at the mother who opens the door, Mrs. Buxton. Wait, do you remember the girl's name? Laura. And he says, ma'am, in a British accent, your daughter Laura left her trash in my yard. And mom's, of course, very apologetic. She says, she takes it and she calls her daughter, Laura Buxton, and she says, what are you doing this? And Laura looks at her mom and says, Mom, what are you talking about? She says, look, it's got your name on it. And Laura Buxton, a completely different Laura Buxton, says, Mom, look at it for a minute. That's not our address, and that's not my handwriting. Two Laura Buxtons, 100 miles apart. The second Laura Buxton writes a note to the first Laura Buxton. The two of them eventually meet. They're about the same age, about the same height, and they both had a hamster with a birthmark on its tushy. And they met and actually became friends on a BBC television program. So if you think the Chanina ben Dosa story isn't true or isn't really relevant, because who's going to really do that, I share with you that Laura Buxton story of that same thing. Stuff gets lost and then stuff gets found because people make those little efforts to do those acts of incredible connection. And I share that with you for two different reasons tonight, because here we are in this month of Elul, this month of reflection, of looking back on the past year, of looking at our mistakes, looking at those places where we could have made a bigger effort to make a difference. And I say to you that we might say, first thing, we might say, we listen to the Chanina ben Dosa story, and we might say, if we find something that is lost, or we see somebody that's in trouble, we might say, I can't do that, because look at Chanina ben Dosa, look what they had to do. They had chickens, they had eggs, they had goats milk, they had goat's milk cheese, all of this. And if I start to help, God only knows, it's good when the rabbi can use that phrase on the bima, how much I'm going to have to do to take care of that. And I tell you here and now, can you imagine the power of what Chanina ben Dosa did? That man who made that special connection, and there's story after story of sometimes it just takes that little piece of effort, and it doesn't have to become the whole Chanina ben Dosa story to make a difference. And if we stop ourselves from helping someone because we say that it's too big for me to get to the biggest end that we could ever imagine, we might never start helping people in even those tiniest little ways that make a difference. And so I challenge you with a very interesting number. Many of you have heard me talk about the number 1/60th, right? There's a beautiful teaching in rabbinic circles about 1/60th. That sleep is 1/60th of death, that dreaming is 1/60th of prophecy. When you go to visit someone in pain, you take 1/60th of that pain. And it goes on, and some people say, why 1/60th? The Babylonians counted in Bates 60. So it's one part in a 60th. You also might know that you're supposed to leave the payot of the corners of your field. It's not 25% of your field, the corners. It's actually 1/60th of your field that you're supposed to leave for the widow, stranger, and orphan. I share that with you. I share that Chanina ben Dosa story that is quite big and elaborate and rather incredible, but I also share that Laura Buxton's story with you because I would say, even if, as we live out that value, if something comes across that we can make that special connection for someone and get someone to the place where they need to be when they need to be there, even if we make even 1/60th of the effort that Chanina ben Dosa and his wife Rachel did, even if we just do that one tiny act of connection, if all of us do just those tiny pieces of looking out for other people, of taking care of other people, of making those moments of connection, imagine the way we can do tikkun, real repair, real care in our world. Shalom means that we create a whole that is more than a sum of its parts. And each of us, if we reach out, if we do these acts, if we make these connections, think of the incredible shalom that we can create. Amen? Amen. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.